Oh, very good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our public meeting. We begin with the pledge and the four-way test. Mike. Thank you, everyone. Please join me. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we have the four-way test. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And finally, fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you, Mike. All right, now the meeting going to inspire us.
All right, I seem to be filling in for inspiration. I really am not going to be the inspiration du jour from now on. My thought that I would share was inspired by, I stopped at the park this morning and dropped off casseroles and saw Kelly. And helped that population in that part of our community that truly needs it. And I, as we're coming to the end of it and making the transition to Parker House, I'd like to just take this inspiration as recognition of those efforts. And it's an iteration of a Baxi quote. We are not all in the same boat. We are in the same storm. Some have yachts, some have canoes, and some are drowning. Just be kind and help whoever you can.
It's time for announcements. To begin, oh no, yes. Do we have any guests? I see Ashley, I think pretty soon you know we're going to be a guest, maybe this afternoon. Anyway, in the meantime, how about anyone else? Sure.
You say guests or announcement?
Yes.
Oh, guests. Okay, guests. We still have, Amanda.
Oh, Amanda.
I guess, for now. And, Ashley will be.
Yep. We got it. All right, well, welcome, yes. All right, announcements. Speaking of announcements, we have a Santa board meeting right after our meeting, so please stick around. And the topic of discussion is whether we should admit Ashley into our club or not. And I believe we're gonna say yes. So Santa board meeting, and I just want to remind you tonight, shining a light on hunger at Vista 222, which is 222 Missouri Flat Road, 6 o'clock. It's a fundraiser for Raptor Creek Farm, the food bank. Great event, and if you can, come on by. Okay.
Actually, I'm just following up on that because I was going to mention it. Yeah, okay, no, that's great. So that's tonight. I'm not trying to be, but everybody who can, that would be great. I also want to remind you that I am collecting food. So if anyone wants to get food in the food bank, they particularly asked and said that what they were having a need for is they're the ones that provide lunches for kids all summer long. So they're part of that lunch program where they rotate and make kids are usually getting lunches during the school day. You need to get lunches. So one of the things that they asked for were like fruit snack things, packaged peanut butter crackers, things like that. So I have a kind of back in the back. There are some things you can take a look at. So if you're not one that necessarily wants to give money on a weekly basis or whatever, one thing you can do is when you're out grocery shopping, just pick up something extra, bring it on Thursday, put it on the back table, and I will make sure that it gets to the food bank. Yes, Lenora. Well, you can give me money. I will bring it. If you would like me to do that, I would be more than happy to bring it out. I'll put it in an envelope and say that it's from our Rotary. Because I did talk to Patrice and told her I would do that. It's kind of following up on what Jody did a few years back. And like I said, I know that was pre-COVID and we're in post-COVID now. So maybe kind of just pick up that program again. So you can give money to me. I promise I'll get it to the food bank. anyway, and anything else you want to deliver, and I'll just make sure that it gets out to the people. Thank you.
Porch Fest coming up 2 Saturdays, so please see, there's a couple of you that are new in the club, Ashley and Amanda, sorry. I don't know if you know what Porch Fest is. It's an event we put on. It's our main fundraiser. Funds go to youth activities. It is June 15th, so please, if you can be there, come help. I think everything's lining up pretty well, and we got our commit from the city a couple days ago. All that stuff got turned in. Thank you for everybody that gave us those spreadsheets. And that's really it. It's going really smooth. Everybody's working great. We'll see everybody there.
Hi, so for those of you who don't know, Gina Marie, and I'm the club treasurer this year. And I'm getting ready to send out dues for the coming, it'll be July through December dues period. So be checking your emails. Double check DACDB to make sure I have the correct email. Or if I need any other information about who to send an invoice to, please let me know that as well. And of course, always reach out if you've got questions, but you should see those coming out sometime over the weekend, if not sooner. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Anybody else? That's it. I believe Judy, would you like to introduce our guest speaker today?
Okay, let's see if I can do this.
Hello, all you fine Rotarians. How are you today?
Yeah,
Good. I'm really happy today to be able to introduce Ian Foster. Ian is the city planner for Jacksonville, and city planners, of course, our Jim was a city planner, it's all great work. But a place like Jacksonville has some unique characteristics, and I thought he'd be an interesting speaker. Born and raised in Medford, after graduating South Medford High, he spent a year as a Rotary exchange student in Slovakia. So he speaks Rotary. That's where he first developed an interest in land use planning. He went to Linfield College. After that, he spent some time in Portland and Salem working for the legislature, apparently got the cure. In 2013, he completed a master's degree in community and regional planning from U of O. After graduating, he decided to move back to the Rogue Valley, where he started a job as a planner with the City of Jacksonville. A year later, he was promoted to planning director. He's a member of the Medford Road Rotary Club, and that's the one that I came from. It had, at the time I joined, 140 members, and it is as formal as we are informal. So you can do and say anything here, Ian, if you find. He was president of that club from 22 to 23, and he currently serves as president of the RCC Foundation Board and as a member of the Rogue Valley Manor Foundation. In his spare time, he likes to travel. He recently took up golf, and he spends most of his free time dealing with an Australian Shepherd puppy named Frankie. So welcome, Ian, come on up.
Well, thank you, Judy. Thank you, President Jim, fellow Rotarians. It's an honor to be here before you. And first, thank you for all of your hard work. As a fellow Rotarian, I know that you do so much for the community, and it's really appreciated. So I'm really excited to share with you about planning in Jacksonville. There is a lot of nuance with working in a historic town with our kind of status. And I usually only have an audience for an audience when there's usually something controversial. So this is great to have kind of a friendly audience for something like this. But to do a decent service to the city, you really need to understand the city's past. So I'm going to start with a little historical context and then kind of bring us back into current planning and how that's formed by our past in Jacksonville. And often these speeches, I usually present to a more local group. So, I know in Jacksonville, everyone loves hearing from the fire department. It's kind of a thing. And so when it comes to the planning department, it's usually not as welcome and as well received. Fire department gets cookies, they get notes that are friendly. If we get a note at the planning department, we usually know that it's not going to be very friendly. It's usually, you can tell just by the way it's written on the envelope, that we're probably not going to be getting any sort of love letter from that. So, is there a clicker or
Here,
okay.
this one right here. Goes back and forth. Whoops. All right. One of my, I think you're just, how do you use this more easier? I can use different.
Okay, so but for a town of about 3,000 people, we're actually pretty well staffed for planning department. So we handle all the current planning for the city, meaning everything from processing permits for new housing to zoning review for things as small as fences and sign applications. And we do long range planning stuff. So right now we're looking at revisions to our comprehensive plan, which is kind of our guiding document that feeds our current planning system to updates to our development code. And we also look at we're also taking a look at our urban growth boundary and whether we can accommodate projected growth for the city. So if you could click the next slide there.
Hold on. Doesn't work. Will it go with a click? That's what I used to do.
There we go. And then click again if you wouldn't mind. Well, not quite yet. So for staff, we're all pretty committed to excellent customer service to our residents. So Jacksonville had a kind of a reputation of being maybe not the most receptive to the community, to people in the past. So we've really tried to rebuild customer service to our residents and making sure that they understand the planning process and the importance of why we have it in a town like Jacksonville. And if you could go to the next slide, we also maintain an extensive record of every dog in town in our office. So we're the most dog-friendly department in town, and they also happen to be our favorite residents. So next slide, please. So generally, land use planning very broadly is intended to capture a vision for our community for the future, which sounds fairly lofty. So how do we do that? Well, in Oregon, there's kind of a unique hierarchy. If you could go to the next slide. Oregon is one of the only states in the country with a statewide planning program. That means every city that in the state is required to have a comprehensive plan and is required to have an urban growth boundary, which establishes how and where we grow. And that is reflected through the 19 statewide planning goals, which are then reflected into our own local comprehensive plans. And that's the same in Jacksonville, the same in Grants Pass, same in Medford. Jacksonville's first comprehensive plan was drafted in the 70s after the passage of Senate Bill 100, which established Oregon statewide planning program. But it took until 1994 for us to actually get that plan acknowledged by the state, which is pretty long, took a very long time in terms of how those generally go. But that's kind of the theme of Jacksonville. I mean, it takes a long time for really anything to get done in that. So we're not working at lightning speed there. But the reason why things take so long, there's no question that Jacksonville is unique. We actually have one of the oldest landmark districts in the country. It was filed in 1966, the same year as the National Historic Preservation Act. So our comprehensive plan had to navigate preservation and growth through our policies. So we have to provide opportunities for growth, but preserve what makes Jacksonville so special, which set us up for some unique challenges. So one of the things to consider is that when you have a historic district, it doesn't mean that you're just frozen in time. We are not a museum. People live in Jacksonville, and we have to accommodate the growth. So we have to look at best practices in planning about how we can accommodate that, but still recognize our heritage and not detract from our historic district. So it's kind of a continual balancing act of not having some adverse effect on the historic district, but also still allowing for infill and growth within that district. So it does have its challenges. So how did we get that status? It started, Jacksonville started, I think a lot of you probably know some version of the origin story of Jacksonville, but we started as a gold rush town in 1851, when gold was discovered. And from there, news spread and people started flocking to Jacksonville. It was the government and social hub, and at one time was the largest town in the Oregon Territory. It was a thriving commercial center. but how in 1884, the railroad decided to bypass Jacksonville in favor of Medford. We could go to the next slide. So we tried to maintain our status and find a solution for that. So we built a little spur railroad, which was operated by an engine that was not exactly reliable or really powerful enough to carry passengers. So you can see the little spur line there on our old Sanborn maps, and there's actually a picture of it. So in fact, the engine was dwarfed by the passenger car, and had trouble making the trip between Jacksonville and Medford. It was nicknamed Dinky, the Tea Kettle, and the Jacksonville Cannonball. So this didn't really help in Jacksonville's endeavors in maintaining its status as a prominent town in the county. Ultimately, that led to the county, Jackson County, deciding to vacate Jacksonville as the county seat, and they relocated to Medford in 1927, and Dinky was abandoned. So Jacksonville was literally now on the wrong side of the tracks. So the downtown commercial buildings were repurposed to house the county poor. The old significant inns became poorhouses and sanitariums, which left the structures intact, but deteriorated. So this example is the US Hotel, which will kind of come full circle because it's actually a story right now that's kind of been in the news lately. So you can kind of see this is how it looks later on after the county left, and as it kind of further deteriorates, the next slide, you get the idea. This was kind of the common theme throughout Jacksonville during its era. And then during the Depression, go to the next slide, there was actually a second gold rush in Jacksonville, though it was very short-lived. And people were just digging up every square inch of Jacksonville looking for gold. And so they were doing backyard gold mining operations, which led to this kind of Swiss cheese effect in Jacksonville, which we still are dealing with today. We have sinkholes that appear all the time, and they just open up, and we've had trucks fall through, and it's a result of this Depression era gold mining, which didn't really do a lot to revitalize the local economy. But in the 1950s, a fellow by the name of Robbie Collins bought a house about a half block off of California Street, which is the main corridor through Jacksonville. But soon after, the State Highway Department planned to expand Oregon Highway 238 into a major highway, and with that, they were going to tear down about 11 of the buildings that lined California Street. So Robbie never really had it in him to be a preservationist at the time. Didn't really want a highway outside of his bedroom window. So he ultimately forged a relationship with Glenn Jackson, who was a prominent highway commissioner from the Rogue Valley. And ultimately, the state gave up their endeavor to have that highway punched through the middle of Jacksonville. And it also led to the National Historic District being established in 1966, which is why we have such an important, our planning department has such an important role in maintaining that status to this day. So if you go to the next slide, you can see this is the zoning map, but the blue line, it may be kind of hard to see, but the blue line captures our National Historic Landmark District. So it's pretty much the entire center of town, and it spans pretty extensively throughout town. And it's a pretty large district that needs to be maintained. So going back to the US Hotel example, Robbie Collins set out to make this kind of a catalyst project for Jacksonville. So he worked with the US Bank in Portland to get them to set up a branch. And at the same time, the Brick Festival was founded in Jacksonville. So we kind of became an entertainment hub for the Rogue Valley. And at the same time, this building was kind of brought back to life with the US Hotel moving into that space. And it was a turning point. It led to a lot of interest in town and fairly steady growth. And now it's gonna come full circle because US Bank just recently left that space. And so we were again dealing with the building that was kind of falling into disrepair. There were no tenants except for a little antique shop on the corner. But Brit Festival recently negotiated with Jackson County, the current owner of the building, to purchase the building. Where they hope to revitalize it, and they're gonna have a little small performing arts center upstairs. And then hope to bring it all back to life. And to have some off-season concerts in the upstairs space. All the while, we as a department have been working on a plaza project right outside of the US Hotel building on 3rd Street. So we're working with ODOT. We received a grant to do kind of a modification outside that building to also kind of will coincide with the changes to the US Hotel. To have like a pedestrian space and to have an open plaza, because Jacksonville's kind of lacking that. If you've ever been to the downtown, there's not really a great common area for people to hang out. So some other examples of recent preservation. So this is the Kublai House. This was early on, and then if you go to the next slide, you can again see the kind of the trend of well, I guess we missed the deterioration, but this is the current iteration of it. So we worked carefully with these owners on the preservation plan for this house, which was a very careful restoration project of all of the historic features. So they maintained most of the historic windows, doors, and all of the features on it, redid the foundation. And so, you know, one of the things that we're looking at with this is just making sure that the historic resources are preserved as best they can be. But also we have to look at the context around those things. So again, recognizing that we have to allow for new development around these historic resources. And so when we're looking at how we do that, the kind of the perception is that any new development in a historic district should look old. And that's actually the opposite of what we want to do. So we are not looking at replicating history, because if you're walking down the street as someone not familiar with the town or any historic district for that matter, you don't want to be confused and think something's historic. So we have to kind of balance that with making something compatible to fit in, but not replicate history in any way. So that's kind of another careful balancing act. And to do that, we have a historic commission that reviews the plans within that historic district boundary. So it's a big job for that group. But all of that to say, right now we're kind of dealing with a lot of cities in the state about how we can accommodate growth, because Jacksonville has had steady growth over the years. And so we're looking right now at kind of these basic questions about how we can accommodate growth given our status as a national landmark district. What would be the least impactful, yet still would kind of fit and still would allow for us to meet our housing needs. Jacksonville has a shortage of housing, and particularly this medium to high density housing. And we can't just ignore it. So it's something that we're really carefully looking at right now. At how we can do that. We've actually surpassed Ashland as having some of the highest housing prices in the Rogue Valley. So that is something that we have to deal with, and it's not really a sustainable path, particularly when we look at our median age in Jacksonville. From 10 years ago, we were at 55, and right now we're at 65. So it's just people are kind of aging, and you know, we have to look at ways that we can bring in, you know, a range of different housing options and bring in a range of different populations into the city. So that's really presents its challenges, and also can be somewhat of a challenge just working with the residents of Jacksonville to try to navigate that process. So and the other thing that we're dealing with this is we have to kind of look at whether we can accommodate that growth within our current boundary. In Jacksonville, it's faced with, we have slopes on most sides, And then on the other side is exclusive farm use land. So we don't have a lot of areas that we can potentially grow. So, and the state kind of looks at these things fairly formula, it's very, it's based on a program, it's pretty formulaic, so, in some ways they say, well, you have plenty of areas where you could grow. You have this like flat area on top of this ridge, you can put multifamily housing up there, but obviously that's not a great place to accommodate that housing. So we're kind of working through a lot of those challenges right now as well, and kind of looking through, doing an analysis of all of our surrounding lands to see where we could prioritize if the city decides that we need to expand our urban growth boundary. And the other things, a lot of cities are facing this throughout the state, is parking reforms, which is a result of some OIRs that came through. So we initially were faced with the requirement essentially that we had to eliminate all of our parking minimums within the city of Jacksonville. And that was because we happened to have a frequent transit line. River Valley Transit District had a line that went through Jacksonville, and the state requirements that were that any within a half-mile buffer of that transit line, cities had to eliminate parking minimums. Well, in Jacksonville, that's the whole town. So we received an exemption to that, but we're going to have to reevaluate it soon. But we're kind of working on ways that we can accommodate those pieces too. Again, dealing with the unique situation with our historic district and these rules that are coming down from the state. So next slide, we can kind of skip over this actually. And really, I think at this point, that's all I have. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. Keep skipping through. Good.
Sorry, the microphone, 2 questions.
I can walk around, yeah.
What is the population of Jacksonville?
So right now, it's just about 3,000. So it's pretty small county, so, yeah.
So the potential urban growth lands that you're looking to expand into or that you will create, the ones that are currently farm, exclusive farms, do they lose that designation if they become urban UGB?
Yeah, they would lose that designation if that were to be the direction we would go. That designation would go away. I mean, once we annex, that would change. So
Population, what is your 20-year forecast for population growth?
so our 20-year forecast actually declined a little bit. It's still growing, but not at the same rate. I think there was kind of an anomaly with this most recent forecast from Portland State University, is kind of what guides the population forecasting throughout the state. And they dropped us to about 300 new people. So it's not a huge number. Yeah, over 20 years. So it was not a huge jump. Yeah, so, but before it was, much higher than that. So, yeah. Yeah, and that's part, we're also constrained. So it's kind of like, we're trying to, yeah.
I kind of got involved with our planning, and I hear your lament about the parking, and especially since you are a tourism town. I think that's the thing that I don't quite understand from the state, is that we don't want extra parking, but tourism is your major industry. How do you make that work? Because how are people going to get there? Because you probably have the same thing we do, is we don't have a robust transit system that makes it easy for people to get on, get off, and come to your city. So is that why you were given an exemption, or was it you have a certain amount of time that you're going to have to figure it out?
Yeah, so we'll just bring back a little trend on this. Yeah, so we actually received the exemption partly because, but we have to reevaluate 2028. So it's not a complete exemption. But yeah, we have a headway, which is a bus service through town. It's every hour, and that's kind of the threshold right there. So that's why we were that triggered. But we also don't have, our two main corridors through town are state highway. So we don't have a lot of extra space to provide on-street parking. So there were a lot of unique reasons why they ultimately granted us some extra time to kind of evaluate that.
I actually have two questions. One is whether there will be any kind of hotel or housing within that US hotel. And also, do you have any comments or observations or funny stories you can tell us about Brit or any of the complaints that you get without getting into detail, but if you've got any good ones to share?
To the question of housing in the US hotel, that's very unlikely because of it's not been used for residential purposes in a number of years. And that requires an occupancy change, and then that gets into the building code. And that would require substantial, the whole project will require some pretty substantial improvements anyway, that residential use is a whole different. So it's not going to be used for that. As far as anecdote stuff, Brit is a unique feature we have. It's one of the only concert venues kind of nestled right in the middle of a residential area. So that takes up a lot of our time during the Brit season. And we do field a lot of concern from people about the impacts of Brit. One person who purchased their house in 2018 complained that because they thought it was a classical music venue. And we're upset by the type of performances that were taking place there, so.
Roll.
I attended a board meeting with 1,000 Friends of Oregon, I think it was in April at the Magnolia Hotel, which is fabulous, a wonderful venue there. I just wonder if we're coordinating with or have any interaction with 1,000 Friends to determine these new zoning planning rules. And also, why don't we see a picture of your dog?
So yeah, but we've had some interaction with 1,000 Friends, but we're still in the early stages, I would say, of evaluating our needs. So we're not quite there yet, but they're aware that we're going through this analysis, and we communicated. We have a representative from DLCD on our advisory committee. That's the Department of Land Conservation and Development, who kind of is our rep down here at the local level. That's kind of assisting through this process as well. So there's communication, but not direct right now. So go back and then I can. Yeah.
Do you also have the train?
We do have the tree. Yeah, well, we don't, the city doesn't, but it's on the Bigham Knoll property. So you can see Dinky, it's sitting out on the field. Yeah, it's still there. Well, it went away for a while, and then it was found and brought back. Yeah.
So just from a planning perspective, you have major concerns with wildfire forestry interface and also water sourcing problems, anything in that direction?
We have a lot of concerns, given how we're nestled in that area there with the mountains right behind us. We're in a high risk area, there's no question about that. So the city has been pretty proactive in our approach for kind of revising some of our code requirements for the urban wildland, particularly the urban wildland interface, but just citywide. We have more authority to enforce debris cleanup on properties, dead tree cleanup and things like that. Evacuation routes was kind of the first thing we did and establish just to make sure that we're well prepared and have the appropriate emergency preparedness plans in place in case of an incident. But yeah, we are continually working on updates to the language of our urban wildland interface in our development code as well. We have one, but there's always room for additional improvement on there. So things like, the types of plantings that you can have on your property to, in certain areas, to how fences, not allowing wooden fences to interface directly with the structure. So there's a lot of those considerations. And then as far as water, we have, as far as our system goes, it's somewhat, it was improved in the nineties, but we have reservoir issues that we're, actually working on doing improvements to right now. So we've done a couple of projects addressing those issues.
Sorry for all my questions, but I kind of fascinated with Jacksonville for a lot of reasons. I was just wondering what your median income was. And then another fact in my research of communities around, I am amazed at that your fire and police are basically financed through your water bill. So I was just curious, because I know you've got a huge fire and water service fee on your water bill. And I was just wondering how that came to be. Do you have a low property tax, or just kind of curious?
So Jacksonville does have, we have our property taxes locked in, so we've had struggles with that. You know, there's not a lot of ways we can increase that, so the surcharge is a result of that. And the first time that was implemented was for the fire department. I was not around when that happened. It was certainly had its controversy, and actually there was case precedent on that at the time. But yeah, so it's a lot. And then we recently did a police water surcharge, which resulted in kind of an effort in the community to kind of to undo that, to do a meals tax as a. But that went down, and it would, you know, so we're always looking for stable funding sources, but it's challenging in the first of Jackson, for sure. Yeah.
I just say in response to that, because I'm currently a city council member and we have the same issues. And so we just did a $12 and a lot of people are really upset, but in researching, I think it's like 35 for the police and 45 for the fire each month. So I think Jacksonville's got to be like one of the highest around. And I was just curious. I know you tried the meals tax, but I was just wondering if there was a reason, property tax wise, that, you know, what your rate was set at to where you didn't get that much money.
Yeah, the property tax, there's not a lot of leeway in Oregon once that would measure 5, thank you, kind of lock us in. So, and then as far as our median income, it's actually not as high as some people think. And it's mostly, the retired population, so it's not reflected in the numbers about actual income. So it's kind of reflects the statewide median, and so it's not as much as people thought. So
When I was a little girl, we would go over to the Jacksonville Museum. My mom was from New York City, and when we would have anybody visit, we had to go to the Jacksonville Museum. And I wonder if you could give us a status report on if that's still alive and if kids are still coming there, and what's up with the museum?
well, the museum was in the courthouse, which is now the city offices. So that's our city hall building now. So no museum, but there's an exhibit on the ground level. You can look at some older photographs, but no artifacts or anything like that. There's an effort right now to bring the museum back into town. So we have some grant money to assist with that. But that's still a little ways out, but it's not going to be to the same level.
Is Bozo still there?
And Bozo's house is still there. Yeah. Bozo the Clown. Yeah. One of our more famous residents from Jacksonville. Yeah, so his house is a landmark structure in Jacksonville.
that used to be kind of a museum for Bozo.
Yeah. Anything else? Oh, sure.
One of the things I really like about Jacksonville, you have a great trail system pretty much behind the bridge. And I'm wondering, is that the Parks Department who maintains that, or it seems like a pretty extensive trail system you got?
So it's a lot of volunteers. So we have the Woodlands Association. So it's a group that kind of coordinates with the city And but it's its own entity that does a lot of the maintenance for our trail system. But if anyone's in Jacksonville, I highly recommend checking out some of the trails. It's really kind of a neat feature that we have. But yeah, we owe a lot of that maintenance to the woodlands, so.
I got cut off, I took a big mouth, but I have a fifth grade teacher that is visiting it annually to Jacksonville, to the cemetery. We go into the museum in the morning and the cemetery in the afternoon. We built crossword puzzles about it. Is there any sort of push to try to get that back? Because that was just such a, the old museum, yeah, we usually, yes, grave rubbings, we learned all the Peter Britt, and it was fascinating. And so it seems like there would be some sort of push in Jacksonville to kind of bring some of that back. Has there been that?
There is, Jacksonville Heritage is a group that's kind of formed to kind of work on bringing projects like that back. So, we're trying, but yeah, I know, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks for a great presentation, but, I just wanted to do a plug too for the music presentation that the elementary school does. That's so awesome, and it's been going on for years, so you might want to mention.
The presentation at Britt at the Brick Grounds, I don't know when that's gonna be, but it is, I don't know all the details, but we can. Okay. Yeah, yeah, those, okay. 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 That's great. Well, thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you for coming. We need to be out of the office. Welcome, and thank you. And I know you have a difficult job, and good luck with it. Okay, how about Valerie? You are.
Sorry, folks. I should have thought before I started asking all those questions, but yeah, kind of who I am. And once again, I just, there we go. Okay, so I always kind of look when I know I'm gonna be sergeant on, kind of look for something fun in history. It's like, okay, it's time to do a little rabbit hole research, which as you know me, you know I love to do. So I kind of checked it out. 1933, the first drive-in was opened in Camden, New Jersey. That kind of seemed fun. 1971, this is sad, but big in my lifetime, Ed Sullivan aired for the very last time. And Ed Sullivan was like, you know, that's when my frenzy for the Beatles, that's, you know, that was a huge part of my life. And of course, in 1998, Sex and the City premiered on HBO. So those are all kind of fun things to kind of look at, but nothing hit me as hard as D-Day. And the crazy part about it is I recognized as a child growing up, I never really heard that side of the story. My father served in World War II in the Army, and he was on a boat or a ship or whatever, getting ready to invade Japan if they didn't surrender after the H bomb. So I'd always heard about that side of the war and that, you know, the story, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for, you know, the atomic bomb. And of course, if Oppenheimer came out this year, that was kind of the big thing. And, you know, that was kind of the history I always heard. And then for years, my dad would never buy a Japanese car, or, you know, that's kind of the war as I saw it. And so this is kind of good for me because it made me really look at that war and sacrifice in a whole new way. So I did a little rabbit hole digging. And learned about D-Day. And I just found some amazing facts and recognized what sacrifice people gave on that day, because it was the day in history, the largest amount of deaths in one day in a war. But I'm gonna go back a little bit and just say, it started by Operation Overlord, and they planned it for 2 years. It was 2 years in the planning. So it just kind of makes you realize how much is involved in all of that sort of thing. It was the largest amphibious military operation in history. It was a coordination of allies, the biggest being Britain, the United States, and Canada, but there was a lot of there was 12 other allied countries that came in and worked together. These numbers are amazing. Shortly after midnight on June 6th, 13,000 aircraft were mobilized in England. 18,000 British American parachutists were launched. Think about that. Think about 18,000 parachutes coming down in France, at the north of France. That just boggles my mind. Then the ships came in. There was over 7,000 ships. There was 160 troops that stormed the beaches. 160,000 troops stormed the beaches. That didn't count the 13,000 were aircraft and the air parachutists that came down. So there's 18,000 parachutists, 160,000 troops that were brought in. And there was so much that had to be coordinated in that. It's mind-boggling. And the way that they tricked the Germans, if you really get in it and take a look at how they had the Germans convinced they were coming in at a different port. You know, all through this, they came. So they were totally tied up in a whole different part. So they were able to come on board. Not that they didn't face a lot of German soldiers, because they did. And they had battleships. In listening to some of these people who have lived through it, saying that as they were storming the beaches, there were bombs flying overhead, just knocking out the Germans as they went. I mean, it's just, when you read these people who experienced it, which that's another sad thing. It's been 80 years. Right? So we're talking people that are over 100 years old. You know, there's not very many of them to tell their stories. So when you hear their personal stories, it comes alive, literally, what happened. So at the sea part of it was called Operation Neptune. So the chances of survival on that day were 1 in 4. The average age, less than 22. The youngest was 17, who lived to be 84. So he lived, the person who was youngest lived through the war. The oldest was Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who was 54 years old, and he only lived a month after that. But he also was given a Medal of Honor because he was the first one to lead the troops on D-Day and face that battle. That day, there were 4,414 troops killed. Of those, there was 2,501 Americans. And when you read the stories of them moving forward, and you think, gosh, they didn't want to be there. They had a draft going on. So, you know, you always think of these heroes that are just marching forward because, yes, they're fighting for the freedom, but most of them didn't want to be there. They had no idea what they were really getting into, and there they were. And once they started moving, they didn't have anywhere to go back to. They had to just keep moving forward. So when you think about that, and you think about the numbers, and you think about where we are now, it just makes you realize, wow, what a generation, and what a day that we don't want to forget. We want to remember this. There's lots of lessons to be learned. As we know, we're kind of in a little bit perilous time too, and I'm hoping that we can as well learn lessons from that. But on the positive side, and this is, you know, technology and humankind and innovations that come about as a result of that, there were some kind of cool things that came about. Number one, tide prediction medium. We found a way to predict tides. And actually June 6th was supposed to be June 5th. But because of the tides and because of the sky and because of the storm, the troopers needed clear sky to drop the paratroopers. And they also needed to make sure that the tide was high enough to bring in the people on the ships. So there were so many things involved with that. So it was a time when, you know, scientifically, we really started using a lot of those things. It was first use of landing craft on beaches, horse gliders, which ironically were invented by the Germans. They were gliders that they were able to glide down silently and bring in a lot of things ahead of time. So they had these gliders that they sent all the heavy equipment, put them on gliders, and then they came down and put a lot of things in place before the troops arrived. They also had Hobart's funnies, which I had to look that up twice. But they had specialized armored tanks because they had learned from experience on other things that tanks, and particularly in this place, once they got on shore, they didn't necessarily travel well on the sand. And the place where they were landing, they had done research and they knew that it was a difficult terrain. So they had all these sorts of specialized tanks for different purposes in different places, and they called them Hobart's funnies. And if you get online, it is kind of interesting to look because there's some pretty funny looking things that they came up with as ways to solve the problem and to make it work. They also had mulberry harbors. So they literally took old old ships that were no longer in service. They sunk them. They brought in large concrete structures, the phoenixes, to put over the top of them. They added floating roadways, and that's how they were able to get all artillery. Thank you, artillery. Thank you. Up to what was needed. So, I mean, you start looking at this operation and all that had to happen. It was absolutely amazing. And the last one was Pluto, a pipeline under the ocean, 3-inch wide pipe that had floating ports or conundrums that were able to fuel all the tanks, because once they got there, they needed the fuel to continue on. So a day that we can't forget. So I just, like I said, I looked for sorts of wonderful things, and then it came down to we just need to honor those people who've made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. So there it is. And with that, I will say, how about some happy thoughts?
Chris. Anyway, on a good note, we did have the Shoes That Fit with the Boys and Girls Club on Tuesday. I want to thank all of you that came. We had way many more people than I expected. So I apologize for those of you that didn't have a job to do, but I really appreciate you coming and being there and being able to see the kids. We gave 49 pair of shoes away. Some of the kids were there and not able to, we're going to have the shoes refit. Others just weren't there, but it was really heartwarming listening to the personnel from the Boys and Girls Club telling us about the fact that a number of these kids, of course, are homeless. They got almost 80% of the kids that go to the Boys and Girls Club are at the at-risk stage. So, we do good work. So thank you very much.
And I have 5 happy bucks, and I have a happy announcement, Jody. You get to do this again next year. All right.
I'm happy to be back from Bentley, Italia. The one thing two things that are memorable for me. One is, and this is for you planet people. In much of Europe, the housing is one house on top of another, and they're all packed together, but they have an open space for the people to wander around and walk. And one of the delights of a visit to, especially southern Italy, is the passeggiata, where the kids come out, the dogs come out, and they wander around, and you sit there in the open air restaurants and enjoy being together. And we don't have that here. 6th Street, G Street, full of traffic. The other thing that this was a surprise is the further north you go, they not only have the menus and the street signs and the directions in Italian and in English, but when you get to northern Italy, it's in Italian and German and English.
Thank you. I have some happy bucks. I want to say thank you to Ian. He's been a friend of mine for at least 10 years. I don't know how we met, but he has done a lot of public service. And I know from being in that Rotary Club that they have, the more opinions and voices there are, the more potential there is for conflict. And we have very little in our club, right? But thank you, Ian. And I really appreciated the invitation. I'm a huge fan of Jacksonville, and thank you for what you do. Also, less than a year ago, I got to fulfill one of my bucket list dreams, which was to go to Normandy. And that was in September. And I'm sure several of you have been there. I did a lot of research ahead of time and some afterwards, and yeah, it was quite an incredible thing. And life-changing, I would say. So thank you for reminding us of that today. Thanks.
Okay. And you guys will be back.
Jim and I did, Shoot the Fit for the first time at the Boys and Girls Club. And my first little girl came up to me and I opened the box and I looked inside and I said, "What's your favorite color?" And she says, "Pink." Well, she got this bright pair of pink shoes. But the other thing she told me was, "Has anybody worn these shoes before?" And I said, "No, these are brand new, straight from the factory. You're the first foot to go in them." And she was so excited. And that's when I realized she had never had a brand new pair of shoes. This program works.
I want to thank you for the presentation about Jacksonville and a lot. And I want to thank Medford Road, because I'm not sure if you're aware, but you're helping us with a grant for water in Cozumel. So your club has committed $2,500. So thank you very much.
And I'm gonna add my happy bucks, because I love Jacksonville. I love Jacksonville for the history that it has. I've got friends that live over there. I go over there often. So, and I do know as a planner, that's not as easy to position to be in. So, yeah, you're gonna find a lot of antis, and we joke back there at the table of the people who are anti, who moved in after it was there, that obviously didn't do the due diligence to know that, you know, hey, that's we see a lot of that. So, thank you for that presentation. Shoes a fit, I couldn't agree more. It's just, I've been twice now, and it's just, you see them come in and you don't think about it. I mean, most of us, you know, been able to give our kids shoes and those sorts of things, so you just don't have that in mind, but they come walking in, sometimes in these boots that you can tell that, you know, that's it, that's their shoe, and, you know, and they take their foot out, and of course it's smelly and stinky and everything, and they're just in awe that they get to take home a pair of shoes. It's like, they almost feel like, do I have to give it back? It's like, no, that's the thing that's amazing to me, is that you just don't see that reality that's really out there. So, from the mouth babes, it's really joyful.
The other thing that they did was. The other thing that I noticed was that the kids would apologize that they didn't have socks.
Oh, yeah.
So where's Nora? I know she's here. There she is. She was our sock deliverer a couple of times, and that I think is something we ought to.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. That's important. Okay.
Well, this is an exciting time of year for school board members because of all the graduations. And so I've attended the GED graduation, the Grants Pass Flex graduation, the Gladiola graduation, both Grants Pass High School graduations. And there's one more at the Youth Authority. So, and it was amazing this year. Every member of the school board wanted to attend every graduation, and that never happened before. Oh, and so the next day after the high school graduation, I went up to Seattle and saw a ballet, one I'd never heard of before, Hopiel. I can't even pronounce it, but it's a little French village, and it's kind of reminded me of Pinocchio because there's a doll maker and a guy falls in love with the doll and then realizes, it's not the best situation, and his girlfriend forgives him and they get married.
That's wonderful. And thank you for what you do on the school board and for all this great. And thank you, Kim, for helping a lot of those great programs to happen. So schools have changed. We know that to be true, and it's important that we change with them and do what we can for kids. They're all sorts of kids, and they need all sorts of things to get across that first finish line. So I still see some cards being handed out. So obviously they're still scrounging, and if you want to be a winner, this is your chance to put forth a couple bucks and win big. So anybody else? Okay, so I'll kind of hold off. how many kids graduated from Grants Pass High School? Do you know that number? Okay,
35 with 50, 34 from GP Flex, 53
okay, yeah. I'm sorry.
The question was, how many students graduated from Grants Pass this last week? It was 305 from Grants Pass High. It was 32 completers of the GED, 53 from Gladiola, 34 from GP Flex. And then next Thursday is the Newbridge graduation. I don't know how many students we have graduating, but overall so far 400-ish.
Okay, do we have our cards all given out? Everybody, my card. Case, just in case I win. So, here we go. And I will let our speaker be the lucky guy. Pick a card. There's 2 of hearts. Oh. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Actually, that's a good omen. I want to thank everybody, especially Ian for showing up. Jody, once again, Shoes That Fit, wonderful program. And thanks to Valerie for all that information, historical information about D-Day. And I found this quote, and I understand it's D-Day was much beyond just friendship, way beyond that. Nevertheless, this quotation stuck with me and it seemed appropriate. Anyway, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. With that, thanks, everybody. Oh, and we have a stand-up board meeting, don't forget.
Oh.
There's a lot of stuff to remember.
I know.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Hey, no problem. All right, I guess I can.
We do have extra cookies. Whoever asks me for an extra cookie, we do have extra cookies if you want to grab one.